Yeah, I will present a couple of my previous works where I focus mainly on layer-wise analysis of vision and audio transformer models. Just a quick introduction who I am. Right now I'm in my third year as a PhD student at DTU, and I spent the last 3.5 months now at UIT in the machine learning group, and I have until end of April, so it's going by fast. And I'm mainly working on explainable AI, where I focused on understanding hidden representations across different models and modalities. And I also did a few projects on human-machine alignment, so I'm also interested in that topic, but I won't be touching upon that in this talk. And then, yeah, this talk is mainly about the vision and audio transformers and trying to understand them on a layer-wise level. And my overall goal for this talk is to convince all of you why we should actually care about trying to understand the models on a layer-wise basis as well, and not just the output or the decision it makes. And then hopefully by the end, you all have a bit of a better understanding what transformer models know and where they develop this knowledge. Yeah. So since I will be talking a lot about transformer models, I'm going to give a quick introduction of what transformer models are. They were introduced in 2017 with the paper I hope most of you know, the Attention is All You Need paper. And it was originally used for language tasks, and nowadays it's still mostly used for language tasks, and it outperformed existing methods on almost all tasks. So translation, transcription, text production, anything you can basically think of. And yeah, of course, it also led to the LLMs that we all use today, I guess. These architectures can easily be adapted to audio input, so I won't touch upon how the architecture has changed for that. And it turned out it can also be adapted for images. You just need a bit of a trick. So they patch the image and then use embed these patches with a linear projection, and then they can basically use this similar to a text encoding with tokens for each patch and put it into a transformer, and then they get out a classification. And then each transformer layers looks like this. So you put it in and you have this attention mechanism, and then usually you end with an MLP layer that gives you an output. So this is one transformer block, and these vision transformers usually have 12 to 24 transformer blocks inside. There's a few problems that come with these transformer models, even though they perform really well and work super well. We don't understand them that well, so it's harder to explain, even though, of course, there are these papers that argue that the attention mechanism is basically our explanation as well. There is also papers arguing against that, so it's still an open problem, I would say. And of course, these models are very large and take a lot of computational effort to train, but also later to deploy. So it would be helpful to understand how these models work and maybe potentially be able to make them smaller as well by keeping the essential parts. And why do I focus on vision transformers? So in my master studies, I did a lot of vision tasks in different things, and I only use CNNs. And CNNs are quite easy to understand, and they're also quite extensively studied. So one of the most famous studies is this network dissect paper, where each neuron was investigated by what they react to, and then early neurons were mainly reacting to colors and textures, and then later on, you also have objects that are encoded by neurons. So they focus on small scale patterns and colors in the beginning, and then as the receptor field grows and they can access the whole image, they also can focus on objects and more complex things. And I guess a lot of us have played around with visualizing filters in CNNs and analyzing those. So those are quite easy to analyze and quite well understood. But vision transformers, even though they're used a lot today and for many tasks, they have not been studied that detailed. Also because it's not as easy as with CNNs, where you have these filters that can have certain meanings. So how concepts develop in ViTs and what they focus on is a bit of a harder topic. And there have been some works that started doing that, but not an analysis from end to end of the model, basically. So this is where this work started. And how did we look into these vision transformers? We decided to use a method to label the neurons in each transformer block. And these labels we then refer to as concepts. And we label the neurons after each of these transformer blocks. So after the MLP layer, you get out 786 neurons, 68 neurons, and that's like we have 12 layers, and each layer has the same amount of output neurons. And then we analyze those for 4 common vision transformers that are already pre-trained on ImageNet or other large image data sets. So we have the supervised vision transformer, which was one of the first that came out. The Dino version 2, which is one of the best performing ones that we have nowadays. The CLIP model, which is trained on a text and image data. And then the masked autoencoder, which is trained by masking out parts of the image and predicting those. So they're all trained in a quite, in some different ways, but they all perform quite well on image classification tasks. And then we test different concepts. So I will explain how we actually label the neurons and where these concepts come from in the next slide. But we had concepts of different categories. So we divided them into these 9 categories. The most important ones are the colors. Then we have textures and materials, objects and machines, natural elements and organisms, which is a lot of animals and plants. And then we have some places, buildings, activities, and some categories that are not too important. We had to put the concept somewhere. So we have abstract names as unknown, but they don't play a big role. So they will also not show up in the analysis later. So how do we actually label the neurons? We use this method clip dissect, which was introduced 2 years ago. And it is a pretty simple idea. So we have this concept set, which we use just the 20,000 most common words in English. Then we put this into a text encoder, which is the CLIP model. And then we use a probing data set where we use ImageNet and Broden, which I think it was like 110,000 different images. And we put this into the CLIP encoder as well. And then we built this concept activation map, which is for each image and each concept, we built the dot product, and then we have this activation matrix. And then we use our network being probed. Here in this image, because it's from the original publication, it's a convolutional net, but we use a transformer, which works just as fine. After each layer, we record the activations for each image. And then based on these activations and the concept activation map, we find the concept, so the word that activates the most for the images that activate the neuron the most. And then this way we get a label for each neuron. And that looks something like this. So for example, here is one layer that reacts to broccoli images, and it's correctly labeled broccoli, and the same with gymnastics. And this method performs quite well. It has really good labeling, and also in user studies, it showed that it's quite reliable. So we chose to use this method, and I just adapted it to be able to take in transformers networks and work with the Hugging Face framework. So if you're interested in labeling any networks that are on Hugging Face, that should be quite easy to do now. So let's see what we actually found. First, I want to show some images so you also get a feeling for how these models process these images. Here you can see the 5 neurons with the 5 highest activating images for the first layer in a vision transformer. I think this was the supervised vision transformer, but it looks quite similar for all of them, so it's not quite important which model it is. But you can see that it's very color focused and quite simple images. So yeah, we see purple and then some like patterns here and here, or yeah, here's some pink with dots or stripes, but nothing too complex. If we move to a middle layer, we still see that it's quite grouped by color, but we also have more complex images. So especially if you compare, for example, these two lines, here you can see quite simple green images, and here they still look green nature-like, but you can see more complex structures and leaves and animals, and then pretty sunsets. And when we go to the last layer, you can definitely see a big difference where we moved from colors and patterns more to actually objects or more complex images. So we have some bathrooms, some crossword puzzles. Here we have an observatory. So what kind of images the neurons react to changes quite a lot throughout the layers. So this was one of the first things we saw, and this was quite interesting. And then we thought we should put some numbers on this. So we actually analyzed how the concepts evolved throughout the layers. And the feeling we got from just looking at the images is also what we see. So in early layers here, we can see colors are the main concept that is activated, coming with textures and patterns that appear quite early, while colors go down throughout the network. And then natural objects, so animals and plants, grow, and also objects mainly appear at the end of the network. So this is also what we saw in the slide before, that the late layers react to these more complex images. And then we also see that the number of concepts actually increases throughout the network, which is not a given because we do have the same amount of neurons in each layer. In CNNs, we usually have like a lot less neurons in the beginning, and then they grow with the size later on. But since we do have the same amount of neurons in each layer, we could expect a similar amount of different concepts encoded. But we do see that early layers only have like between 20 and 80, and then late layers we go up to 250 concepts that are encoded. And different concept is just so we take all the concepts in one layer, and then we just count the unique concepts. So in early layers, we have some neurons. For example, green is encoded like 20 times. So 20 neurons react to green. And in late layers, for a certain objects and animals, only 1 neuron reacts to this animal. So this is how we have a very different amount of concepts in later layers. And as you may have noticed, I use the word more complex images a lot. So we also wanted to measure if that is actually not just a feeling we have, but if the complexity of concepts that are encoded actually increases with the network. So we measured the image complexity with ICNet, which is a network trained to predict image complexity based on human complexity measurements. And then we take the average complexity of the top 5 activating images for each neuron and average this for each layer. And we actually find that the complexity does increase throughout the network as we also intuitively felt with looking at the images. The only model that this is a bit different is the Dino model, which has like a high complexity middle, and then it goes down again before it goes up, which is quite interesting. We don't know why, but the Dino version 2 model behaved differently in a few ways compared to the other models, which we should probably look into in the future, because it's quite interesting why it behaves differently, especially considering that it also performs the best on most tasks. So that could be an interesting future thing to look into. And then, of course, we went back to comparing it to CNNs, since this is what most of the literature is based on. So when we compare this to how concepts are encoded in CNNs, we do see some similar trends. So the colors in the beginning are very important. And then the CNN focuses a lot on textures and materials, especially in the middle, which we also have here, but not as pronounced. And then it builds up these objects and animals and plants in the end. So the overall trends look quite similar, which is, it's not super surprising, but it somehow is, because in CNNs, this structure is kind of given by the receptive field that grows with each layer. So we kind of need the big receptive field to be able to look at the full image and the objects at the end, which we don't need in the vision transformer, because with this global attention mechanism, the vision transformer can access the full image from the beginning. So in theory, it could also be able to recognize objects and animals right at the start and structures that take the whole image. It should be possible, but it seems that it does not do that. So apparently it still needs this hierarchical building up of concepts and this layer depth to actually understand these more complex concepts. So the next thing we looked at is what happens when we fine-tune these models and how do the concepts change. So we fine-tuned it to the blood MNIST task, which is a data set with different blood cells. They look like this. And then we also fine-tuned it to the CUP bird data set, which is a lot of birds. And the idea is when we fine-tune to these data sets, then the concept should change to what is more relevant for this task. So for the blood MNIST data set, since it's very much dependent on color and texture, what cell it is, these should be the categories that go up. And indeed, here the red lines show us the colors and textures, especially the textures, become more important. And then other concept categories, for example, like natural elements and organisms, they become less important. Also, objects, buildings, and activities are not on here right now because they just go down, but they go down for all the fine-tuned models. And then for the CUP data set, we can see an increase in natural elements and organisms, which seems natural since it's birds. So we should have more bird concepts in here. So it seems that the concepts adapt to what is important for the task and kind of forget irrelevant concepts that we don't need to solve this classification task, which also leads to a decline in concepts in general. So the blue one is the pre-trained models. And then for the fine-tuned models, you can see that we have less concepts, especially in later layers, where not as many different concepts are needed to solve these specific tasks. So what can we do with these insights? So the first thing we're working on now is trying to analyze and understand more specialized networks. So right now, I'm working on a project with Schreiber, a PhD student at UIT, to label and understand MammoClip, which is a model that can produce automatic text descriptions for mammography data. So that's quite exciting to see what kind of concepts these medical models learn, and if this can somehow help us to understand better where the descriptions come from and if these make sense. So I'm quite excited about this project. And then we can, of course, use this to explain decisions. For example, by following highly activated neurons, and then we can explain the network's processing in each layer in terms of concepts that we humans actually understand. And we're working on adding heat maps to the neurons so we can actually understand which part of the image is related to the concept that we're looking at. So this is also some future work that we're hopefully doing soon. And then we can use this to improve existing networks. So as we can see with the fine-tuning already, the network forgets certain concepts and focuses on parts that are more important. And if we, that means we can probably also just remove parts of the network that encode irrelevant parts that we don't need for these specific tasks, which can then lead to smaller, more efficient, and potentially even better networks. And this, we haven't done this for the vision transformers yet, but I actually have done this for audio networks. So this is why I'm going to also introduce you my work on audio transformers, where we actually showed that this works, that we can optimize and prune models a lot by knowing what's going on inside these models. So let's switch to the audio transformers. Here we investigated 4 different audio transformer models in 12 layers and 24 layers. So we have different sizes of audio models this time as well. We fine-tuned those models for 2 different tasks, for word classification and for speaker identification. And we tried to find out what each layer knows about words and speaker. And we do this by measuring graph convexity of words and speakers in the representation space. And since you probably don't know what graph convexity is, I'm going to introduce it to you, because this is something I worked on, I helped work on with in my first year of my PhD. We developed this graph convexity score, which we can kind of use as a proxy for what a layer has learned. And it measures, to put it simply, how clustered the data lies in latent space. And the idea is quite simple. We extract the latent representations of all of our input data, and then we build a graph with nearest neighbors of all these data points. And then when we want to measure, for example, the convexity of this blue class, we take 2 random points in blue, connect the 2 points through the nearest neighbors, and then just count how many points belong to the same class and how many points belong to a different class. So in this case, we have 3 blue points and 2 green points. So this would be a graph convexity score of 0.6. And we do this for all of the data points in our set, and then average over all of the points in one class, and that's how we get a graph convexity score for this specific class. So we measured this in the audio transformer models for words. So we put in the data with the specific word classes, and then these the same data also had speaker IDs, so we could also measure the convexity for the speaker ID. And then we found interesting things. So first of all, the words are encoded mostly in like layer 8 and layer 15 of our models. So depending if you have the small model with 12 layers or the large model with 24 layers. And it's not encoded in the last layer where you usually put your classification head. And then for speaker information, this is even more pronounced. So here we have it in very early layers where we find the speaker information. So if you now would classify a speaker here, you wouldn't even have most of the information that the model could know right here. And then we have this wave-to-vec model, which is a bit different than the other models. It kind of loses all the word information in the end. And it also has a second peak for the speaker information, which other models don't show. This could be due to the training mechanism. So the wave-to-vec model is trained a bit differently than the others, and it's mainly by reproducing the input. So it could be that it kind of learns the content information in the middle, but then to actually reproduce your input data, it needs to go back more to, some audio-specific things, which can also include speaker information. And the other models do not have it that much. So what happens now when we fine-tune it? So we fine-tune it for words and for speakers. So when we fine-tune it to the task and measure the graph convexity of that word, so here for words, we can see that the graph convexity for words goes up a lot. And here, if we fine-tune it for speakers, this one also goes up a lot and then is available throughout the whole network. And then it kind of loses knowledge about the other concepts. So here, the speaker information, if we fine-tune the model for speaker, it loses all the word information. So it just doesn't care about the content anymore. And the same for the word information when we fine-tune to speakers, it loses all the information. So it doesn't know about speakers anymore when we fine-tune for words, because it's just not important for the task. So now that maybe I can go back one slide here, that we see that it, that we have the information encoded not at the last layer, but potentially at early layers. And also when we fine-tune it, you can see here, the information is maximized already in middle layers. Why do we even use the full model? And we can actually prune it a lot. So we prune at layer 8 or 15 for word classification, and then we prune at layer 2 or 4 for speaker identification, so quite early in the network. And then we train the model. And we can save up to 25% in training and inference time for the word classification, while only losing like 0.25% in accuracy. And for speaker identification, we can save half of the time and even 60% of inference time. And we actually gain accuracy. So we have better performing models that are so much smaller than the original model by just choosing the right layer to train our models on. And I think that's quite impressive, and people should probably think a bit before they just use any pre-trained model and then use the last layer and train that. It really makes sense to choose a layer that knows about the tasks that you want to do, to fine-tune only that part of the network. Because you do save a lot of resources and you can get potentially better models. And then the question that came up is, was it just luck that we have a better model now, or did we choose the best layer based on convexity? Does that make sense? So we tested it by pruning to layers 0 to 12. And we actually see, so the ones with the stars are the best performing models. We see that the layer 8, where we've pruned based on convexity score, seems to be the best, except for the yellow, the CC wave-to-vec model. But if we would only choose for that model based on a convexity score, I would probably have chosen layer 9 or 10 for that model. We just wanted to make it comparable across our models. So we can see that by choosing this based on a convexity score, we can actually find the best performing model. But what in this plot we can also see, like, even if you prune to layer 2 or 4, you still have a pretty good performance of like 97%. So this led to our next paper and our next experiments. How far can we actually prune audio transformers? And how much can we remove from these transformer stacks before the model completely deteriorates? So we did a simple similarity analysis of our latent spaces, where we compared the representations after each layer with each other. And we found a very interesting thing. We found this block structure that the models exhibit, which we interpret as two main processing steps that I'm going to go through. So the first 8, 9 layers do one thing, and then the last 4 layers do a different thing and have very different representations. And then we thought we can just remove layers that are very redundant. And we did different pruning strategies. So we started removing just from the back, how we did in the convexity paper, where we just cut off the model. But we can also remove the layers from the front, or we can actually use a smarter pruning algorithm where we remove the layers based on the similarity score. So we remove the layers with the highest similarity to the previous layer first. And with that, we could actually prune up to 42% of the layers with minimal performance loss. And the best thing about this is we just deleted the layers. We had no retraining. So these layers were just completely redundant and could be removed. As you can see, we can go quite far here before we drop in performance. So we can see that almost 40% of our layers are just there and don't contribute anything to the model. And when we can see, when we look at what is actually pruned, so the white layers is what's pruned. As soon as we cut off, like start cutting off the second block, we lose performance. So also when we go backwards, we can prune like close to the first block, and then we lose the performance. So we kind of need both of these processing blocks to be able to maintain performance. And when we use this similarity score based pruning, you can see that layers in both blocks are usually pruned more in the first block, just because it's bigger, I would say. But we can prune, as long as we have parts of both blocks available, the model can still perform quite well. So let's get to a quick summary. So in vision transformers, we found that they go from colors to classes. So early layers focus on colors and patterns, and then they slowly build up more complex concepts in the later layers. And with fine-tuning, the concepts change and the number of concepts also reduces. And in audio transformers, we find that early layers process speaker information, while middle layers process content and word information. And we can prune extensively by focusing on the relevant layers and still keep performance or even improve performance. And then just a little conclusion and outlook on what this deeper understanding of transformer models can bring us. So I'm most excited about getting more explainable models. I'm hoping by providing a layer-to-layer understanding of the models, we can also explain better how the model is processing information from start to finish, and then hopefully also being able to explain decisions from start to finish how the model builds up its decision. Then we can, based on this understanding, we can have informed model pruning and optimization. We can make smaller, more efficient models. And we can also choose models, especially now that we have so many pre-trained models available. If we know what these models have learned, we can do a smart model choice when it comes to specific downstream tasks. And then I believe this can also lead to better human-machine alignment when we know what kind of concepts are encoded in the models, when we understand them and can check if they align with what kind of concepts we think the model should be using, and make sure that there is a bit of an alignment and a better communication between AI systems and us. So yeah, thank you for my talk. These are the papers if you're interested in reading more details. I did not touch upon everything that we did in these works, so if you're interested, please just check them out.